about a story that we worked on together. How do you feel about this story? What comes up to you when you think about working on this?
No, it was an interesting one. We had, there's a dispute over a cemetery road project, federally funded road project in a small town to the south of us, and so it was interesting to work on it with you for sure.
For sure. I feel like very rarely in our office do we get to go to really, really small towns and observe that dynamic. And this story is based in the city of Martindale. Like David said, it's just outside of San Marcos. And for several years, this town has been fighting over a large federally funded grant that they received for flood mitigation. And it was about $6.6 million. And really, the argument is over how the city wants to spend it and how they've planned for this project and what areas it will impact. But I want to start with the origins of this grant. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so the grant traces back. It started with the money comes from the federal government and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Texas General Land Office administers the grant for Texas. So it was about $6.6 million that was distributed or available to Martindale to do a flood mitigation project that would also rebuild sort of a central report road in town. And this road has been damaged over the years by flooding. So people in charge that have been pushing to get this grant used for this project say that this road needs to be rebuilt, and that the drainage, there's a drainage issue that they want to run sort of a drainage culvert underneath the road, and they've been trying to get that done. So this has been ongoing for about 4 years. There's been 3 mayors sitting in office since this began. And physical construction hasn't really started yet. So there's a few reasons for that, why they haven't started construction. There have been some residents that are unhappy with the easements, and easements, they're like, the city needs a certain amount of property alongside the road to get this construction project done. And to get that property, they're using eminent domain. So they're going to compensate the landowners, the property owners for it, and that can take some time and some legal work to get through. So that's kind of been an obstacle for the project. The other thing that came up and that we really dug into pretty deeply is that this project would run the flood water, that drainage culvert that I said on the road, and it would end at a cemetery, which is a historic cemetery, and just feet away from the graves in it. The cemetery is called Creighton Sproul Cemetery, and there are people in town who are uncomfortable with the proximity of that to the graves, and they're concerned about possible damage there. And so most recently, the city has faced probably maybe the most significant roadblock of all, because they got a letter from the Texas Historical Commission that essentially instructed them to halt work on the project because of the cemetery, questions over who owns it, and protecting the grave.
And I think to fully explain the Texas Historical Commission's role in it, we should tell you more about the cemetery. David and I went out there at the hottest part of the day in Martindale and talked to residents, but also talked to the people who help keep up this cemetery. And so to kind of set the scene for you, the cemetery dates back to the 1800s, 1840s, is named after a family that moved to Martindale before it was even the city of Martindale. owned thousands of acres in the area, John Creighton, and he's buried in the Creighton Sproul Cemetery. And if you were driving through Martindale on this main road that we're talking about, this road, you would, I think, pass the cemetery. It's kind of in the cut. It's between the river and, trees that are lining the road. And if you weren't specifically looking for it, you really would pass it. Although there are several signs leading up to it because of its historical significance. And the cemetery is interesting because John Creighton and his descendants are buried there. And there's kind of a gate that's around his grave and several others. But then there are also people were enslaved that are buried in that cemetery. And there are also several unmarked graves in this area. And we met Cindy Woolley. She's one of Creighton's descendants. And she talks about how she grew up learning about this cemetery and getting involved in it in the 90s. She was already married by the time she was really starting to go out there to this cemetery. And she and her cousins and her family members and friends who are kind of history buffs that became friends, they began taking care of it starting in the 90s, mowing, caring for it. Even in 2002, her family successfully got the cemetery historically designated. In 2020, they paid out of their own pockets $800 for the smaller medallion that you can get when you're historically designated that sits at the cemetery here today. And she talked about how for the years they suspected that there might be graves that they didn't know of in this area. Kind of the local lore in the town, David and I were hearing about it, is that the Ku Klux Klan came in and vandalized several graves and threw headstones into the ravine and into the river. And so in 2023, her family paid for ground penetrating radar. And David does a really good job of describing this in the story, how she was saying it kind of almost looks like a lawnmower, but really they're taking pictures and trying to figure out what's underneath the earth. And through this process, Miss Woolley and the association that, cares for this cemetery said that the company that was doing the ground penetrating radar found 29 more graves. And just, a testament to Miss Woolley and kind of her plight with this cemetery. She said that the person who was doing the radar was putting a pink flag and everywhere they found a burial site. And she and her cousin later went and purchased small headstones and put them at each stone. So it was really interesting hearing her talk about how her family over the years has tried to maintain this spot. It's you could see how easy it would get for it to get unruly just because of where it is, the trees that are growing. It wouldn't be hard or take long for this area to become overgrown if there weren't people taking care of it.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us back to what's going on with the project and why the Historical Commission asked the city to stop work on, not go forward with the construction work right next to the cemetery. Right now, there is an ongoing lawsuit between Woolley, the Creighton Sproul Cemetery Association, which she's the head of, and it's just a small nonprofit that was formed by the people at Woolley, basically, who oversees this, and others. And so that lawsuit is to settle who owns the property. They want to clear up who has the title to it. And in the lawsuit, we go into this a little bit in the story, but they give, the history of that cemetery. And you touched on this too. It's so interesting. We pass cemeteries all the time in our life, but very rarely, I think, do you see cemeteries that go that far back with grave sites that go that far back. And like you said, people who were enslaved by the some of the original landowners in the area. And so it's like a really, really interesting history there. The cemetery dates back to the 1800s. You touched on this, but in the 1870s, John Creighton, who the cemetery is named after, deeded the land to the San Marcos Missionary Baptist Church to be used for a cemetery for white and Black people. They explained that in the lawsuit. That church no longer exists. So Woolley and the association are making the argument that they've been taking care of this land for many years. Woolley took an interest in it back in the 80s, and she has pictures of herself and a group of people doing maintenance and work on this cemetery in the 90s. So they've been working on this for a long time, long before this road project was ever considered or even known. So that's their argument, or a big part of it is that the ownership of the cemetery lies with them. She's a descendant of the original people that were buried there. And also that she says in the lawsuit, and she kind of explained this to us also, city didn't really seem to have much of an interest at all in the cemetery or upkeep and stuff like that. So she's been in charge of it. The letter that the Historical Commission sent to Martindale in July, just less like a month ago, said that the city needed to stop work until they figure out who rightfully owns the cemetery. So that's pending in court. It's unclear how quickly it'll be resolved. The Historical Commission also highlighted issues with how close the construction would be to graves, and that there needs to be some, there are newly discovered graves that are actually even like closer to where the construction would happen, this ravine, where they're going to finish the culvert and for drainage. And there's a sort of questions over how close they could get to the graves and where the construction exactly would happen. So it seemed like the Historical Commission wanted a better picture of how things would be protected long term.
Right. And the Historical Commission, they said in that letter that they thought that the proposed construction would, be in violation of the Texas Health and Safety Code, specifically the provision prohibiting work that would disturb a cemetery. But the state agency also raised concerns about what the impact of the completed project would be and whether or not that would bring more floodwaters onto existing graves. The letter, the way it reads, does give the city some action items, right? Like it says we need more information, or we need to understand better, kind of what you illustrated, how these newly discovered graves that are closer to the ravine, closer to where you're trying to do this work, how that impacts this historical site. But all of this is really coming to a head because the city is on a deadline. Let's talk about that, because like you said, the grant was issued to them in 2021. It's now 2025. So let's talk about the conundrum that this puts the city in.
Right. So you can imagine delays on a construction project are never helpful and they can become costly. But this project is federally funded and it's under strict you have to follow strict policies and procedures to use federal grant money, and they're on a deadline. The Mayor Fowler explained to us they are working on a deadline, and I guess there's two parts to the deadline. It's December of 2026 and January of 2027. She said essentially the project pretty much needs to be done at some point in December of 2026. So they don't have a lot of time if they haven't begun construction yet to get this done. They would be tearing up all the road, in this construction area, installing drainage culvert, and then rebuilding the road. That takes a lot of time. Add to that, there's no given timeline for how long it would take to resolve this legal dispute over title to the cemetery. And you've got a real time crunch problem there. So the mayor said during city council meeting that they needed to start work on this project and select a contractor by September 1st to have a chance to stay on deadline.
So it's just really not looking good for them either way they turn. And I got a chance to sit in on this city council meeting, which I love sitting in on small town city council meetings. They're very interesting. Everyone's passionate and engaged. And when we were there, they had a lot of different items that they were getting to. This was kind of last on the agenda. And when they got there, you could kind of see why, because everyone was fired up about it. The city council members, the mayor, and the people who were there to give their opinions. And the mayor in that meeting, to start off that agenda item, kind of laid out what we just laid out, the conundrum that they're in, that they received this letter from the historical commission saying stop work, that they have this deadline that's coming up very soon, and also this internal deadline that the engineers and the grant administrator, and they have kind of established that by September 1, we need to be going on this. We need to be starting construction. And we spoke to her before the meeting, and she said, I'm not really sure how else we can go with this other than voting to cancel the grant. But once we got there were city council members who really were not wanting to go that route. We talked to one of the council members, Mike McClab, who said multiple times, and he's the one that motioned for them to table this vote entirely. He thought that they were rushing to make this decision, and he wanted to hear more from their engineers. And he also wanted to hear more from the GLO about what their options were. And one big concern that kept coming up was, like you mentioned, this is a federally funded grant. It's administered by the state. And there were real concerns about whether or not they would have to pay what they've already spent of the grant back. They've already spent some money just out of their own budget, but then also some out of this grant. And I think it was more than $1 million, or right around that figure, that they were looking at having to repay. And remember, this is a small town, so it's a large amount of money for them. David, you've been doing a lot of the correspondence between the GLO for this report. What's your understanding of their role and what options are available to the city at this point?
Yeah, so the GLO got back to us, and they explained that the struggle to use federal funds is real. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's very strict policies that you have to follow. The GLO said that their goal, what they want to do is provide guidance and help to the city and to people who are using these grants to ensure that they use the term audit proof. So you can
voting.
You wouldn't have to give the funds back in the event that something came up. It wasn't clear, from what the GLO said, if they would or wouldn't need to give the money back. What the mayor told us when we discussed this with her was that was just a really big sum for a small town with a small tax base. The GLO, reiterated that the guidelines that have to be followed are federal, not theirs, and they are there to sort of administer the grant, but they don't set the policies. That's done at the federal level. So that's sort of where the GLO came down on it. I know the city. You mentioned Mr. McClab. He really wants to try to see if they can get some an extension of time from the GLO, and get everyone in a room so they can all discuss this, with their attorneys and engineers and stuff. So that's where it sits with them.
Mm-hmm. And we can't really talk about this without talking about the perspective of Councilmember McClab, but also the former mayor, who we mentioned this has been going on for a long time. The former mayor was a part of trying to get this project going, and now is kind of giving her opinion as not the sitting mayor. And then we also talked to another city council member who voting not only is looking at this from an elected official's point of view, but again, this is a small town, and he's one of the folks, the residents that would be impacted through an eminent domain perspective, whose land might be utilized. But they met us out there at the cemetery and talked us through a couple of things, but their main point was that they were their understanding from their own engineers, they say, is that this project, both the construction and the outcome, would not impact the cemetery. That's their perspective on this. And they also let us know that they believe that putting in this culvert, that by dealing with this ravine that kind of sits between the road and the graves, it would in some ways protect the cemetery from erosion and from any damage that could come to the cemetery down the line through flooding. Let's talk through the elements of this that they brought up to us, because one particular part that I want you to talk about a bit is what Councilmember McGovern was talking about regarding the floodway and the other options voting available to the city.
Yeah, so another city councilman that you spoke to out there by the cemetery is McGovern, and he explained that there were two other alternate options for the project. He acknowledged one would have diverted the stormwater between his property and his neighbor's property, so it would affect him. And the other one would have diverted stormwater through Glaze's property, who was the former mayor. He said the reason why they didn't go with those projects was because that when they diverted, those diversions would have sent the water into the river at the level of the river, and he called it in the floodway. He said it could have affected the neighbors on the opposite side of the river, on the opposite bank, and it could have also caused FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to get involved, and those issues could have created a lot of like so-called red tape that could have hitched up the project. And so he said that the engineers recommended the option that they're going with, which is to send the water into the ravine. And they keep coming, the proponents of the project have come back to this ravine as
Voting
it exists and is the natural place that water, runoff would go. There's obviously a road and